several weeks by myself. It doesn't sound quite so hollow now. We've been looking at John for over a year now. We're in the last chapter and the last few verses of John today. But it's been good. I've enjoyed walking with him. All those stories that John tells us, we've got the miracles, the signs that he called them, and what he had each one for major purpose. We got to listen in as John told us about personal conversations that Jesus had with individuals. He brings it into not just the masses we're talking to, not just parables out there, but what he said to Nicodemus, what he said to the woman at the well. Today, what he's saying to Peter. It's just something intimate about the book of John. I think it's been a year well spent to look at that. And, especially on this Mother's Day, I expect that everybody that has a living mother, you're going to do something today to honor them. Some of you have just by being here with her. And that's great. And she doesn't even have to ask. She knows that I love you, Mother. I care for you, Mother. But we see that's what Jesus is asking Peter today. He says, do you love me? Do you love me? We're going to look at that question for Peter. We've looked at so much and seen so much about John, and we've seen Peter's gone this last week or 2 weeks. I wouldn't want to be in Peter's shoes. He's had a rough time of it, hasn't he? I mean, he stepped out there, and when Jesus was in the upper room and he said, I'm going to a place that you can't go, Peter says, why can't I go? And he says, all of you are going to deny me. Peter says, not me. He looked at him and said, Peter, 3 times before the rooster crows. Such a great destruction for somebody that was so, a leader, outgoing, gregarious. He's beat down here, and then the things that they've seen over the last week, they thought they were going to have their own earthly ministry here that would grow into an earthly kingdom, and that they were going to sit down with Jesus and rule the world. Instead, they saw their leader arrested, saw him falsely accused, saw a ridiculous trial, saw him take him to the cross and die. They buried him. And then to top it all off, his body went missing. That night, they're gathered together that first Lord's Day, and they're gathered in that upper room, and they've got the doors locked, and here comes Jesus. 2 times in the same week he did that. Can you imagine the emotions of these disciples? It must have looked like a bowl of scrambled eggs. I mean, it was so stirred up. They were high, they were low, they were broken. It was above anything they could believe. And to top it all off, they're confused. They don't know where they're going. They don't really know quite what they're doing. And they go back to Galilee. And Peter, when you get in times of stress and trouble, do you have a go-to place that you go to just to think? A lot of guys, it's the garage, the fishing boat, the lake, the shop, out in the field. We've got some place that we go to that we just got to get our heads together. With Peter, it was, I'm going fishing. And 6 others said, I'm going with you. So they get out in the boat and they go fish. They fish all night. What a very good night. They spent all night there to no avail. But I'm sure it gave them time to think and ponder about what's next. And then comes Jesus' voice on the bank. And he said, have you caught any fish? I said, no. He said, put your net on the other side, on the right side of the boat. And they did that. And they hauled in that great number of fish. And I'll bet Paul could tell you exactly how many. He's not in here right now, but I think it was 153. The number of fish that they caught, this huge haul of fish. And then they come in and they have this fish fry. Well, I guess it's probably just baked fish over charcoal coils. And Jesus fixed up this fish. They had breakfast. They relaxed. And the disciples have got to still be asking, what's next? What are we going to do next? And in the midst of all that, like John does so many times, we pull one conversation out of it. He pulls Peter aside. He looks at him and he says, Peter, do you love me? And Peter says, well, of course I do. No, Peter, do you love me? Now, this wasn't just a single conversation. With all that he'd been through, it was an opportunity to have Peter reestablish himself a little bit. You know, I've heard some things about this, and we'll get into them in a minute, about what the difference is between the three questions, what the difference is between the different words that are translated love, and what the meaning of it all is. But you got to picture where Peter is, what Peter's been through, and what Peter's life has been like. Get a little bit of a picture of that. I want to go back and look at Matthew. Go back to Matthew chapter 26. It's the same account, but from a different witness from Matthew. Matthew chapter 26, verse 30. And this is kind of where Peter's coming from. And when they'd sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. And Jesus said to them, you will all fall away because of me this night. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I am raised up, I will go before you to Galilee. Peter answered him, though they all fall away because of you, I will never fall away. Jesus said to him, truly, I tell you, this very night, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. Peter said to him, even if I must die with you, I will not deny you. And all the disciples said the same thing. But Peter was the first one out of the gate. And he's just completely ignored what Jesus had just not only prophesied, but had quoted the Old Testament, where he says that he would be stricken down and that the sheep would be scattered. And Peter says, not me. No, I'm not going to do that. Peter, I guess you could say he was a little bit proud of himself. Maybe thought he was just a little bit better than everybody else. And then a little bit further over here, back to John in 13, you don't have to turn there, but in John 13, Simon Peter said to him, Lord, where are you going? And Jesus answered him, where I am going, you cannot follow me, but you will follow afterwards. Peter said to him, Lord, why can I not go and follow you now? I will lay down my life for you. Peter is just a go-getting guy, and sometimes he's go-getting so hard that he doesn't see the brick wall right in front of him. He's just going to go. He's just going to charge. Just going to get out there and get after it. And he's actually right here in this. He's contradicting Jesus. Now, I don't have to tell you that's not a good idea. If you contradict Jesus, you're probably going to end up in some difficulty. After he quoted the Old Testament scripture that he would be stricken down and that the sheep would be scattered, Peter says, oh no, that's not going to happen. I'm going to stand up for you. I will die for you. And Peter was operating out of feelings and emotions, wasn't he? He had such a high view of himself, he said, I can stop this. The Old Testament prophesied it. Jesus said it, but I can stop this. You ever jump track like that? Get so in charge of a situation that oftentimes we don't even hear the Holy Spirit. We just charge headlong. You see, the thing is, though, about Peter and all of that, is he never believed that he could deny Jesus. He never thought that could enter his mind. Like King David. King David never thought that he would commit adultery. He would have believed, if had he committed adultery, that he would cover it up with a murder. Solomon, the wisest man, he would have never thought that 700 wives and concubines that he would succumb to that he would be pulled away from his Lord by that. So if one of the bravest men in the New Testament, one of the greatest warrior kings ever, the smartest man to ever live, ever, falls to this, we are really in trouble if we think that we won't. Proverbs tells us that pride come up before a great fall. Each one of these. Don't get so goal-oriented that you forget the mission that we're on, the reason that we're here in the first place. And so it went with Peter. Peter's really broken here. He's really hurting. So we'll come back to our text here in the 21st chapter of John. And he says, when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Feed my lambs." He said to him a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him a third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was grieved because he'd said to him a third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." And Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep." 3 times. Jesus asked the question. There's lots of commentary and theological thoughts about this, and I've heard it preached and discussed so many different ways. One of the focal points that some of them talk about is in the word love there. You're all aware of the fact that we've got one word in English for love, and we've got about 5 of them in Greek. 4 that are used in the Bible, 2 that are used in this. The first 2 times that Jesus asked Peter, "Do you love me?" he uses the word agape, the highest form of love. And each of all 3 times, when Peter responds, he responds phileo, brotherly love, friendship love. You know, you're my buddy, man. The third time, Jesus asks the same question. Do you phileo me? You really like me? And there's a lot of discussion on that and what each word means, what each phrase means. And some of them even go so far as to say that when Jesus changed from agape to phileo, that's why Peter got upset. It was because he was lowering his standards. Others I've heard talked about, well, the reason that he asked the question 3 times is because Peter denied Jesus 3 times. And it's kind of a balancing thing. Since you denied him 3 times, we would ask 3 times to give you an opportunity to repent for each one of those. But I actually believe that if you look at it closely, there's 3 completely different questions there. 3 completely different responses. I think that each time Peter's response is a little different, and each time Jesus' response to his answer is a little different. Let's look at it. You know, it's the first time he says, "Do you love me more than these?" And Jesus says, "Feed my lambs." The second time, he responds with, "Tend my sheep." It's more vocation-oriented. And the third time, he says, "Feed my sheep." So, the third time, though, Jesus switches off to this phileo, the same word that Peter's been using time after time. And Jesus is asking more than that. You see, that first time, I think what he's asking about there is he's saying, "Do you love me more than these?" I think he's talking about the disciples. Do you love me enough that you're going to put aside your friends, all these other things that you're about, your old life, as it were? Can you completely put aside your old life? You know, you know people who have been saved, and they still want to go back and be with the same people that they were before. It's been my experience that if you're saved and you act like you're saved, those people will separate from you pretty quickly. But they just want to hang on to that. And Jesus is asking, are you going to keep hanging on to those people? Do you love me more than you love those people? Then the second time is more vocation oriented when he says, do you love me? I think then he's talking about, do you love me more than your career? Because his response is not just feed my sheep, it's tend my sheep. Be about my work. Are you distracted by your job? Are you distracted by your own personal goals? Are you distracted by getting that higher education? Are you distracted by being in school? Are you distracted by all of those things so much that they become your idol, what you love? Got to stop for a brag moment here. Our daughter-in-law, she's not getting to have a graduation, but she just finished her master's degree last week. Had the graduation this week, had to do it through there. But that's been a very intense focus during the time that she was studying for that master. And I can't help but wonder what else back here got put aside. What else back here was not the focus? So that's what he's asking here. Your other things in your life, not your old life, but now your Christian life, your Christian walk. Do you love me more than you love those? And then the third one gets really sticky. Because Jesus asks again, do you love these more than these love me? This gets back to where we was talking about where Peter lives. Peter, do you love me more than Barnabas loves me? Peter, do you love me more than Philip loves me? Because that's what we've heard out of Peter, not in so many words, but in his life, haven't we? I'm a little bit better. I'm a little bit up here. They're a little bit down there. These others may do this, but not me. And so Jesus is asking him, are you over that? Because now we're seeing a Peter that's completely different. A Peter that's contrite. A Peter that's humble. A Peter that wants to serve his Lord. And that's where he's breaking down. And saying, Lord, you know me. You've changed my heart. Lord, you've changed everything about me. Do you love me more than they love me? Do I love Jesus more than Elaine loves Jesus? No. I may love him a little differently. I may look a little differently. I sure can't play the piano. But we both love him. One doesn't love more than the other loves. And there's so much danger in that. So much getting full of oneself. I don't know how else to put it other than this fact that, man, I'm so good at this. I can preach so good. If you've watched the videos, you know that's not true. But I'm obedient. And that's what He called me to. God called me to a life of obedience. If He tells me to preach, I'm going to preach. He tells me to sing, I'm going to sing. If He tells me to play the piano, you better look out. Because it won't be pretty. You know, aside, when we first went to college, we went to William Jewell College. And in William Jewell College, I had been doing a little bit of work in a music ministry. I said, well, I want to be a music major. And I took one semester of piano and decided that wasn't going to work out. Because you see, something I didn't know when you got to a college like that and you're a music major, all these other freshman music majors have got 15 years of experience in the music. I was under the misimpression that you went to college, picked something, and they taught it to you. No. Especially in music. You better have a bunch of it if you're going to go be a music major. So like I said, my music major lasted one semester, and I said, this is not going to work. But the thing is I could get so focused on that I spent all my time trying to learn that music and not enough time spending time with the one who called me to do music, the one who called me to sing His song. We go on with Peter, and Jesus starts to prophesy with him. He starts telling him how his life's going to be. There in verse 18 he says, Truly, truly, I say to you, when you are young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. But when you are old, you'll stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you don't even want to go. This he said to show by what kind of death he was to glorify God. And after saying this, he said to him, "Follow me." Has Peter heard that before? Follow me. Remember way back 3 years ago when he got called to start out with? What did Jesus say? Follow me, and I'll make you a fisher of men. 3 years later, working with him, Jesus resurrected, onward to hand the ministry off to the disciples. He says to them, "Follow me." And Peter, though, a little bit of the old Peter comes out here because he's not liking that. Of course, none of us like it when we hear a report about us that's maybe not what we want to. He said, I'm Peter. Nobody's going to lead me by the hand. Nobody's going to take me where I want to go. And if that's what it is with me, what about John? What about John? Peter turned and saw the disciples whom Jesus loved following him. That would be John. And of course, that's how we know all these things, is John was there listening, right? The one whom he had also leaned back against him during the supper and said, "Lord, who is it that's going to betray you?" And when Peter saw him, he said to Jesus, "Lord, what about this man?" And Jesus said to him, "If it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? Follow me." Comparing himself to others. We as a people are so insecure and so anxious to compare what I do with what you do, what you do with what he does, what she does with what she does. Oh, he's so much better than me, I could never do that. Or have you ever said, at least I'm not like old so-and-so? Passage speaks to our heart on that matter, doesn't it? Just after prophesying and telling him exactly what was going to be for Peter, lining it out detail for detail, he says, what about John? What about John? We all want to do that. You know, we're so quick to criticize some people, particularly with ADD. You ever talk with somebody with ADD and they're having a perfectly normal conversation with them and then another thing is squirrel. Did you see that squirrel? Distracted. We're really not that different. When he said to Peter, "Peter, you're going to grow old. You're not going to be the mighty person that you think you are. They're going to lead you around. They're going to take you places. You're going to die a horrible death. And what about John? Hey, Jesus, what about John?" I want to pick it. Comparison one to another is so dangerous. It's so scary. Let me just give you 5 real quick thoughts on why it's so dangerous to start doing that stuff and comparing yourself to the other person. The first thing that happens is you're focused on outward appearances instead of what's inside. You see something on the outside that you think is wonderful and you want to have part of that. Well, you don't have any idea what it took to get there or what sacrifices took place. One of my favorite all-time golf players was the name of Gary Player. I don't know if he's even playing anymore. He's gotten old now. But he was magnificent. One morning he was out hitting golf balls on the golf range, and a guy that was observing him, he said, "Man," he said, "I'd give anything to hit a golf ball like that." Gary Player is normally a very laid-back, soft-spoken guy, doesn't get excited about anything. And he turned around to him and said, "No, you wouldn't. Every day I get up before I have breakfast, I hit 100 golf balls. Every day after I have breakfast, I go hit another 100. He said, by the time the day is over, if I'm not playing golf, he said, I've hit nearly 1,000 golf balls every day. Good days, bad days, sick days, rainy days. He said, I've got to go hit those golf balls every day. And he showed him his hands. And he wasn't a player that played with gloves on his hands. His hands were all calloused. Around the calluses was bleeding from where he had hit golf balls that morning. He said, people aren't willing to pay the price to hit a ball like this. All that person saw was the success of a professional golfer. He didn't see the price that Gary Player was paying every day to do that. So when you compare yourself to someone else and you compare them, look out there and say, oh, I wish I had like that person. Careful. You don't know what's behind the surface of that. Secondly, it keeps you from recognizing that God has a unique plan for you. Each one of us were not saved and given a cookie cutter life. Each one of us was saved for a very special, specific, and unique purpose. If you're focused on somebody else, you're going to miss that. You're going to miss out on that great blessing. Thirdly, when you start comparing, it plants the seeds of jealousy. It begins to build up barriers. That person may not know it. But when you start thinking, boy, that guy's, that dadgum Charles Stanley, I can't preach like him. And the first thing you know, I start build up some sort of animosity against Charles Stanley. Charles Stanley don't even know who I am. He don't care who I am. And God didn't call me to be Charles Stanley. He called me to be Tony. He called you to be you. He has purpose for you. So don't let that comparison start to build those little seeds of jealousy, to build up those walls, those barriers. And then, fourthly, it denies that God is wiser in picking what you ought to do than you are. You're putting yourself ahead of God. And finally, it forfeits the gracious rewards that God has for you for doing whatever it is He has in store for you to do. If He has in store for you, the purpose for you is to clean the church, He wants to reward you for that. If you say, no, I'm not going to clean the church, you're going to miss out on that. You're going to miss out on so much. Jesus said, don't worry about John. You follow me. Jesus says to you and I, don't worry about those other people. You follow me. You focus on me. Everything else will be just fine. You may have some challenges. Some of us got chronic illness, maybe a special needs child, maybe a life of poverty, maybe you've lost a spouse, maybe your career path just stinks and it's job after job after job. It's okay. Maybe you got to put up for 6 weeks or 6 months with the coronavirus invasion into your country. It's okay. It's a path that He's selected for you. It's a life that He wants for you to live. And it's all for His purpose. So what we need to be doing instead of asking for something else is we need to ask for grace to live in the life that God's given you. Ask for grace to meet the goals that Jesus has set for you, that God has laid out for you. Live your life. Face your challenges. And don't be distracted by somebody else's. And if you look at Peter, if you don't learn anything else, learn this, that failure is not the last chapter. So many typical earthly stories would have seen Peter deny Jesus 3 times around that fire and said, that's the end of him. But we know that's not the last chapter. What's going to happen in a few weeks at Pentecost? He is going to preach to thousands. He's going to travel the world. He's going to tell about Jesus, and He's going to do it in a mighty way like He'd never dreamed possible. What if He'd have bought into that failure and said, this is it? And it's interesting, even here, that John adds in here how people can take something so clear and so concise and understand something completely different about it. Look with me at verse 23. So the saying spread abroad among the brothers that this disciple was not to die. We're talking about John, remember? We're talking about here, what if I tell John to live until I come back? What's that to you? Well, they grasped on that and they said, yes, Jesus did not say to him that he was not to die, but if it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? And in a literal translation there or understanding of it, it was kind of true, because as it turned out, John lived longer than anybody else that was there that day. So as far as they know, he did live forever. But that wasn't the intent. The intent was that you hear one thing, it is so clear, it's so concise, and I take a part out of it and say, did you see that he said John's going to live forever? John pointed out, no, that's not it. Then John signs off, and he talks about, you can believe this. You know it's true, because the disciple whom Jesus loves said so. There, in the next verse, he says that this is the disciple who is bearing witness about these things and who has written these things, and we know that his testimony is true. John told us that throughout the whole thing, and I believe that everything he said in the gospel is true. I believe it's all true. And he closed out with something that, if we can't take anything else, by the way, I'll give you a quick quiz here. Why did John write the Gospel of John?
So that we would know.
It's back in the chapter just before this, said that you might believe Jesus is the Lord, the Messiah, and that through believing, you and I might have eternal life. And then he closes out the whole book here with saying in verse 25, now there are also many other things that Jesus did. Were every one of them to be written, I suppose that the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. I think John told us everything we need here, because he told us Jesus lived and died for you and I. He told us here in this closing chapter not to compare, to live the life that Jesus has in store with you, for you. So, do you love Jesus? Do you love Him more than the non-church activities that you're around? Do you love Him more than your job, your career, those personal goals that you set for yourself, more than school? Do you love Jesus more than somebody else does? Feed my sheep humbly. Do you love me enough to stop comparing yourself to somebody else and just follow me? It's what Jesus said. The last thing He says to Peter here is follow me. The last thing He says to the disciples here is follow me. There's a whole world out there to distract you. There's a whole world to compare to. But for goodness sakes, just put your sights on Jesus and follow me. Father, I just pray that You'll give us the courage and the willpower to follow You. Father, when we have that urge to compare ourselves to someone else, remind us, follow me. Lord, just make that indelible in my mind. Follow me. When I'm having a bad day, follow me. When I look back to those old ways, follow me. Lord, teach me. Teach me in all things to follow You. Teach me in all things to honor You. And teach me not to let anything stand between me and You. We'll give You praise for all of that. In the precious name of Jesus, amen.